Joined now by Dr. David Chao at Pro Football Doc on Twitter. Appreciate all of you rolling with us through the program here. Dr. Chao, man, so much to get into. Let's go straight to a story that you really broke at Outkick about Tyrod Taylor and what happened during his injection. You thought that basically what happened did happen. And now the news is out that he got a punctured lung. How does this happen? What kind of shots have you done like this in the past, and what's the prognosis going forward?
Well, it certainly brings new meaning to the word friendly fire, right? I mean, certainly unanticipated here and a surprise. But that's what the fact pattern was. And doing medical detective work, that's why I said, well, this makes sense given the rib injury on Friday, healthy pregame, and then all of a sudden the chest issue. It is a known complication, so I'm not trying to bang on the team doctor who did it that much, which is why I haven't really specifically said his name, even though I know it, trying to give him some leeway in case, but also because it's a known complication. It's supposed to be avoided, but this injections happen all the time in the NFL. I went with my assistant and said, well, how many times do you think I did rib blocks on players? And we came up with, 1 to 3 times a year, people would break their ribs or we might have to inject them. So that's an average of 2. And each rib fracture might need an injection 2 or 3 weeks before they're comfortable enough. So we took that as 2 times 2.5. So 5 times my 17 years, I came up with the number of 85. That's not scientific, but you can see how common that even one type of injection is, much like other different kinds. So complications do happen. Yes, they're only 1%, and yes, doctors are judged on a higher scale, and it's too bad. But the good news is there's not going to be any long-term damage to Tyrod Taylor. We wrote that he wasn't going to play this week, and that has come true. But he will be healthy enough to play probably by week 4, if not for sure by week 5.
So how exactly does this happen? He's got an injury in his ribs that they're trying to give him basically a pain-killing shot. What is the intent for the shot that he got? And then I'm assuming they just went too far with the shot that they gave, and as a result reached all the way to his lung and then ended up puncturing it. Explain what they're doing, what the intent is, and how that happens.
Well, the intent is an intercostal nerve block or a rib block to take away the pain. And the reports are he played with a broken rib. For example, I've done this on several occasions on several different years with Phillip Rivers. He talked to him, and he did give me permission to talk about it. So that's why I can name names, and it's not a HIPAA violation. But very painful to play with rib fracture. And yes, Tyrod got through pregame, but no one's hitting him in pregame. So in a game, you're going to get hit and be very sore. So the rib block is to take away that pain just in that one little area. And the nerve is deep to the rib, and right underneath the rib is the lung lining. And when we use the medical word puncture, I stayed away from the medical word puncture on Monday when we talked about it through Outkick and otherwise, because puncture to me almost is like taking a nail and driving it through, and it just seems so grotesque. Medically, it's accurate. So Adam Schefter's report yesterday was 100% accurate, but it's a very tiny, tiny needle hole that does the puncturing. But an air leak can be created, and gradually air accumulates in the lung where it's not supposed to, through the lining, and then air builds up and it gets uncomfortable. Fortunately, it wasn't bad because he went to the hospital, but he wasn't hospitalized.
How do you know? So how do you know that the injection has gone wrong? Is that something you would know very quickly? Like, what would the experience have been like for Taylor in the pregame?
Well, you start noticing it within minutes, and at first as discomfort, and it would gradually potentially grow. And this is why when the game started and attention was on Justin Herbert starting the game on the field, when the camera cut to the sideline, you saw him sitting on the bench, not standing, kind of pointing and kind of rubbing and sort of diffusely across his chest. And the medical doctor was standing next to him, not the orthopedic doctor. indicating to me it wasn't a current rib issue, along with the head athletic trainer. So that's sort of some of the detective work. It's scary, of course, when all of a sudden you kind of feel something in your chest and start to maybe alter your breathing slightly. But his life was never in danger, the way that they handled it, et cetera.
That's a crazy story. All right, so that is the latest there, and you think he could be back theoretically by week 4?
Yes, he can, because the rib hopefully will get better. Certainly no one expected him to play week 3. We didn't, because, even if the lung weren't an issue, no one can expect him to take another rib block before the game, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
But one of the things that
I bet he'll never take one of those again. I wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, maybe no one in the locker room will either.
Yeah,
but
right.
That's another point. But these injection mishaps have happened. The article that is just posting now at Outkick is talking about when an injection mishap, ejection went wrong, and Jerome Bettis missed a playoff game back in his career. So it does happen.
Okay, so other big injury issues. Bosa, Saquon Barkley, both of them now out for the season. Do you believe this was just happenstance, or are these injuries connected in some way to the different way that we're playing this season without the preseason, different circumstances than would normally be the case? Detective-wise, as you go look at these injuries, how would you assess why they're occurring?
Well, as is in most cases, the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's not completely because of the pandemic and the weird schedule. Certainly there's a lot of bad luck involved. Certainly 7 ACLs in week 2 is at least an unofficial record. But remember, week 1 really wasn't that bad. And if you look at total ACLs across the league through week 2, we're at 19. The average over the last previous 5 years for just the preseason without at the start of the season has been 25. So season-wise, we're actually behind pace.
Yeah.
But part of that is because there's been less exposures, right?
Right.
If you ski less ski days in a given year, you have lower chance of tearing your ACL, right? I mean, less times down the mountain. And because of no off-season program and no preseason games, and then really a 3-week ramp-up in training camp, so half of it was all ramp-up and only 14 padded practices, that's why the total is lower. In general, though, there's probably a little bit of a shift of acclimation injuries for ACL that happen more commonly. Usually it's about 25 before week 1 starts, and about 30 for the rest of the 17 weeks of the season. So the rate in the preseason is a little bit higher. So we're probably seeing the shift of the typical slightly higher preseason rate into the regular season. And of course, anytime it's Saquon Barkley and Nick Bosa, even if it's 2, it's much talked about.
No doubt. As we get ready for Jags and Dolphins tonight, how would you assess the relative health of both teams?
Well, I wish I could help out your listeners a little more like we did last week and we did with article Outkick, where we sort of nailed it with the Bengals and the Browns. The injury difference is not as great. You can go to profootballdoc.com and some free codes for Outkick readers to get on and look at it. And there's a lot of stuff on the homepage too, cover views and everything. But there isn't a complete mismatch in other areas that were obvious from an injury perspective. And that's normal, right? You don't always see that per se. There's some wide receiver issues for the Dolphins, and they have a healthy run game, but there's no big standout that I could say, hey, this is kind of what's going to happen kind of thing. So don't want to get over my skis on that.
What about other games in general? Are there teams that you think need to be particularly concerned about as we roll into NFL Week 3?
Yeah, we're going to be posting a bunch of those and doing some videos and stuff too on that. But, one of the things that stood out for me is, the Eagles' hard luck in terms of all of their injuries on their offensive line. They're just getting Lane Johnson back, and he played relatively well. And I have to give credit to the Eagles' offensive line. They held Aaron Donald and Michael Rockers to no sacks. But you could tell Lane Johnson is not 100%. and they're still missing Brandon Brooks, obviously, and Jason Peters went from backup right guard to starting left tackle because Andre Dillard's out. Now the left guard is out, and so really 4 out of the 5 spots on the offensive line compared to who the starters would have been are either out or at least playing hurt. So Jason Kelsey is last man standing. So especially in a pandemic when you don't have as many practices and schemes and time for an offensive line to have gelled in preseason, that's continues to be something to watch, and they're already 0-2.
Outstanding stuff as always. Dr. David Chao at Pro Football Doc with us every Thursday. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Encourage you to go read him at Outkick.